GSMC Sports Podcast. Before we get into our second segment of the day here on the show, I do want to remind you that throughout the show, if you do feel so inclined, continue to make yourselves available to the Super Chat, Super Thanks, and Super Stickers features here on YouTube. They're a great way, the best way, to interact with the show in a more direct fashion, to get your opinions out there, any questions, comments, or concerns you may have. They are greatly appreciated by all concerned here at the network as Hunter18 enters the chat. Hello to you, my friend. How are you doing? But it just makes the show that much better, hearing from you guys throughout. We love your support of our shows and our network here, so thank you in advance. But without further ado, let us get into our second segment here of the show. Continuing with the Thursday Night Football narrative, as Hunter says, mind if I ask a couple questions? Of course, my man. Fire away, and we will wait for you in that regard. We're going to continue, though, with our Thursday Night Football prop bets. Starting off with the quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings before Hunter18 gets his comments in real quickly. I think that Sam Darnold is one of those quarterbacks you can't really gauge from a betting perspective just because of how volatile this Vikings offense can prove to be. They do seem to feel like they have an interesting balance between what Sam Darnold can do through the air and what Aaron Jones can do on the ground. So that's why I'm a little apprehensive about talking about Sam Darnold prop bets, but I do think that this one looks the most intriguing. I'm going to say he hits the under. His under is at 238.5 yards, and I know it's a little bit of a low bar. As Ty Johnson says, you got any college bets for tonight? I don't think that any games are going on tonight, but thank you for the comment, Ty Johnson. I will check the college football schedules, but I do believe that Boise State and UNLV kick off tomorrow, and I will be talking about that later in the show, so stay tuned for that. But Hunter18 also says this: hi, I have 3 picks I'm stuck on. If I post them, could you tell me what you like the most? Fire away, my man. I do have them at the end of the show as well, so if you have any questions about any of the bets I have myself prepared, then you can fire away as well, but hit me for anything. And then Hunter18 says Cade Otton versus Atlanta for this week, or Hunter Henry versus the Jets in a PPR league. I actually think that Cade Otton is a very interesting tight end that doesn't get the credit he deserves. And I think in this matchup against Atlanta, where, Atlanta's defense did get exposed by the Seattle Seahawks, I feel that tight end heavy teams, especially now that Tampa Bay will have to rely on a guy like Otton, can affect that Atlanta Falcons zone heavy scheme. So I would say Cade Otton would be my pick, surprisingly. Whereas Hunter Henry, I feel like it just depends on the target share in that Patriots offense. Now that you have Drake May, yes, the targets will go up, but I'm not certain that Hunter Henry will always be the guy. So I'm actually taking Cade Otton. I know it's an unusual, unconventional pick from me, but I actually think it profiles the best in this matchup. So hopefully that helps. And Ty, if you're still there and you want to talk a little bit more about college football before I get into my segment, then fire away. But getting back to Sam Darnold, I do think the under for him will be the best way to bet on him tomorrow because of the volatility of that Vikings offense. Then Justin Jefferson, I think that he himself will hit the over, though, because of the fact that he can always impact a game on short notice, no matter what is going on in it. Because of the fact that you never know how the Vikings will look in certain quarters, whether they'll be ahead, whether they'll be behind. And, if they fall behind in this game, which I do think they might just do, I feel like Justin Jefferson will be the reason they can climb back into it. So look for, Sam Darnold to kind of quote-unquote pad his stats later in the game, leading to me believing that he won't necessarily hit the over, but having Justin Jefferson garner just enough yards to hit that over in that respect. He's definitely someone who can exploit defenses later in games, because you feel like you have the Vikings offense corralled at certain points, and then you have to worry about Justin Jefferson going off on your tired defense. So who knows? I feel like this feels like the safest bet of any skill position player on the Vikings, just because he's Justin Jefferson, and you have to account for how good he is and how important his standing is really in this Vikings offense, no matter how it looks day to day and week to week. But that's the safest bet, in my opinion, for the Vikings here. The two safest, rather, for the Vikings in this game. On the Rams side of things, I feel like they're going to play it safe a little bit. I will address your comment, but I do want to get to the Rams a little bit before that. Hunter 18, but I thank you for your comment and your patience. I do feel like the Rams here are going to keep it simple. They're not, going to try to completely overwhelm them with, what McVay can do on the offensive side of the football. But I do feel that they know their identity. They know their culture without and with Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. And for the time being, potentially the last game, they will have to play this way. They're going to do ground and pound attack. Thus, I feel like Matthew Stafford will hit the over, just because I feel like the Rams can get a lot of yards after the catch for him. But I do feel like that one's a little bit of a tenuous one. Over 235.5 yards. I do think that's a fine enough total for Matthew Stafford at this point in the season, but I do feel it's dependent on guys like Atwell extending the play and, things of that nature. So I do think that the Rams' passing attack right now is something that you can't necessarily ignore, but it is something that is going to be heavily reliant on the receivers themselves, not necessarily anything Matthew Stafford will have to do out of the ordinary. And then in terms of the running game, this is where I feel like the Rams will really lean on a guy like Kyren Williams. So Andre, if you're still there, I don't necessarily feel like you should bench Kyren in this game. Going back to that comment, I promise, Hunter 18, I will get to your comment. This is the last prop bet I want to get to for tomorrow night. Kyren Williams, then, I do think he will hit the over as well. He's been playing pretty well over the past 3 weeks especially, and I do feel like he's someone who week in, week out feels like he should have some down games, but the consistency of what he can do in the Rams offense and how he sets up what McVay can do to really stretch defenses is his physicality. And I can't ignore that in a game against such an aggressive defense where you might need the presence of a running back like Williams to settle your offense down, especially with what McVay thinks he might be able to do against this Brian Flores defense. So Kyren Williams over 74.5 yards. Look for him to also be a potent option in the receiving game as well. Like I said, a lot of the Rams' yards will have to be accounted for after the catch. So look for Kyren Williams to be someone who can potentially do that. But those are all the prop bets that I do have for tomorrow night's game. It's just a question of, which team feels more ready, looks more ready, prepares better for this game. That will lead us into, before we get into our next break, Hunter 18's comment here about his fantasy team yet again. He needs 2 running backs, a wide receiver, and a flex option out of these players. Brian Thomas, David Montgomery, DeAndre Swift, Devon Achane, Alexander Madison, Jalen Waddle, Deontay Johnson, or even McMillan in a PPR setting. I feel like this is an interesting group of players here just because they're not necessarily players who you would expect to week in, week out perform over expectations. There are some guys on there like Achane and Waddle who have underperformed this season, but it's a group that gives you leeway to really kind of find certain matchups that you like. For example, this week, maybe Brian Thomas's matchup against the Eagles isn't necessarily one you would pinpoint as favorable for him, but it's one that I feel like, considering what the Jags have done with him this season, could be a chance to really see him shine. And then guys like Montgomery and Swift, who are your better of your four running backs here, are two guys that, have had their struggles so far this season, but their best has really been that good. Montgomery, of course, in a very tough matchup where the Lions might run the football more than usual, and Swift in a matchup against the Cardinals defense that really prides itself on wanting to stop the run first and foremost, and did a great job of stopping J.K. Dobbins this past week. So I think that in terms of matchups, I would say Montgomery is the better of those two running backs especially, and then that leaves Achane and Madison as we are RB2. I think Achane will have a good game, but it's contingent on Tua playing and how he looks coming back from this concussion, because who knows? Maybe, Tua will not look the same or play the same in this McDaniel offense, and he might want to consider handing the ball off more often than not, thus leading to more touches for Devon Achane. So I feel like your two running backs should be Montgomery and Achane here. Your wide receiver, I feel like, while it's been such a disappointment, Deontay Johnson, there's just so many rumors about him potentially leaving Carolina. And McMillan, I love, but maybe not in this situation where it's such a highly tense rematch against the Falcons. So I'm going to begrudgingly say Deontay Johnson is going to be your wide receiver. But then your flex could be someone like a Brian Thomas or a Swift here, because I really don't see Waddle impact this game with or without Tua. And not for nothing, Brian Thomas is bringing out the best in Trevor Lawrence, and they want to work with that connection. And Swift, after a bye week, now more than ever, can prove that those last 3 weeks he just had in fantasy were not a fluke. So those are my options. At flex, either Thomas or Swift, your wide receiver being Deontay Johnson, and your two running backs being Montgomery and Achane. Hopefully that helps for you, my man. Thank you for your comments. We do have to take a quick break here. Coming back on the other side, we kind of conclude our positional rankings with our tight ends before we get into our defense and special teams units, but it should be a good segment nonetheless. We'll be right back to talk about them after this short break.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk with